I believe for two reasons. One is God rested because He wanted to give you and I, physical beings, an example of what we should do after work. After we have done the work process, the creative process. God gave us this rest. And it was a rest that came because He had ceased His creative process. 6 days He was working, He was creating, He was doing something creative. Now, the truth is that all work is truly creative. Now, we've got people that do all different kinds of work in this congregation. All different kinds, from manual work to just sitting behind a computer and making things happen. But it's all creative. Whatever kind of work you do, it's creative. In the end, you take something and makes nothing out of something out of nothing. You'll help me now, won't you? Work creates a need for rest. Work is a creative process. And God has called us to work. The Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat. I like to eat, so we work. Man's God-given creative force has brought us many wonderful innovations. The creative force of God brought us this universe, this planet we live on. That was the creative force that came from the mind of God. That's wonderful. Thank God for all that we have, but that same creative force is in you and I. And so that same creative force is what causes you and I to create. We create, and that creation process is work. Whether it's the job that we go to or the things that we accomplish at home, creative process is work. I use the creative process oftentimes to prepare a sermon. As I prepare a message, I say, God, what do you want me to speak to your people today, to this coming weekend? What is it you're wanting me to say? God, give me a creative direction to go. And I believe that God, in that time of study and in that time of preparation, gives me creativity to be able to bring a message to you that's from His heart. I've, in the past, been a songwriter, and I would write songs, and that was a creative process. God would often give the song. Sometimes it was more work. You had to sit down and say, today's job is write a song. And God has blessed many of those songs that I've been able to write. And so, what is it that you do that is a creative process? God is using you to create through your work. To use the creative force that God has given you is to accomplish the task that God has given you to accomplish so that you can be effective for the kingdom of God. The origins of rest are found in Genesis 1:1. The very creative process of God ended with God taking time for rest. Now, we talked about the origin of rest. I want to talk to you this morning about, number 2, write this down, the enemy of rest. Rest definitely has an enemy. We've gone through a lot of cultural changes. Things aren't as they used to be. Now, there's some here this morning that are old enough to remember what it was like 50, 60 years ago when most American workers were involved in physical labor. It required physical energy. In fact, the vast majority of Americans going that far back were actually involved in agriculture, in farming and in ranching. The cities were not as populated as they are today. Now things have changed, things have shifted, the cities have grown, and agriculture, although still very, very important, has been mechanized. It has been taken over by things that do the job that people used to do. And it used to be that as people would work, they would go out and they would work from the moment the sun came up until the moment the sun went down. And in that time span in between, they would work physically. And at the end of a day, they had no problem getting rest. Why? Because they were exhausted. They would lay their head down on the pillow, and when the sun went down, there was no electricity way back in the day. There was no lights. There was no televisions. There were no flat screen TVs. There was nothing to keep you up till all hours of the night. You went to bed. You got a good night's rest because you were physically tired. I think about people today when I hear about these these mine disasters, over in Virginia and things like have happened in this past year. And I think about those miners who are still very physical in the work that they do, getting up every day, and they get their lunchbox, and they get into an elevator that takes them hundreds of feet underground, and they go into the tunnels with their hard hats, and they're working jackhammers, and they're planting dynamite, and all these things that they have to do, the physical labor. Imagine at the end of the day that they come home and they just lay down and go right to sleep. Physical labor. Well, it's not that way today. Today, most of us sit behind a computer. Most of us are working in an environment where the physical end of it is not that great, but the mental end is great. And we get home at night, and our physical bodies feel tired, but they haven't really put out any energy whatsoever, and our minds are racing, and we try to go to bed at night, and we can't rest. You know what I'm talking about. And our minds won't turn off. The wheels are turning, and our physical bodies have not put out like they would have in the past, and we find it hard to get physical rest. The cultural changes have brought us to this place. And as a result, one of the biggest selling drugs on the market today are drugs that help you to sleep. That market, that drug market, has made billions of dollars because people are trying to get some rest. The cultural changes. Now write this down. The other enemy of rest is distractions. We live in a very fast-paced culture. Our culture has been geared up for increased productivity. Everything is designed for you to get more done in the course of a day. So we've got all of these time-saving devices that help us get more done, but at the end of the day, we are now more tired because of how much more we've accomplished. But we can't seem to get rest because we haven't put out physical activity. And so our fast-paced culture is a distraction to our getting rest. Now, if God rested, ought we not rest? God set us the example. Distractions come in the form of many different things. Technology has become a distraction. I love technology. I'll just tell you, I love technology. I love what we can do today with technology. In fact, this church is made up by quite a few people involved in the technology industry. Those of you who are working in scientific fields, and those of you, we have electronic engineers, several in our church, and we have people that use all kinds of fancy electronics, those of you in the medical profession. Thank God for electronics. Thank God that you can get a scan, all these different scans of your body and find out what's wrong and get it fixed. Thank God that we've got the ability to communicate the way that we do. We've got our iPods and our BlackBerries, and we've got our cell phones. We've got our laptop computers, and we now have our iPads. Oh, I could use an iPad. I haven't got one yet, but I'd like to have one. Christmas is coming. iPads. I mean, we've got stuff to keep us connected. And we are now connected 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We're connected. But that connection can be a distraction. It can become an enemy of rest. How do you live in this culture today and get any rest? We got computer games that vie for our time and our attention. All of these things that they're great things. I love my cell phone. But there are times that, before church started, I turned my cell phone off. Why? Because I didn't want it to ring in the middle of my message. You know what I'm talking about? I know yours ring all the time during my message, but that seems to be okay, but I don't want mine to ring. Now, I realize there's some of you that are on-call people, and that's okay. Just put it on vibrate, all right? That's all right. But these things can be distractions from us being able to get rest. When a family sits down to the table, if they still do, and the cell phones are all at each person's place, and they're all on, and the family is trying to have conversation, and then all of a sudden a text comes in to one. So suddenly they're now out of the conversation. And then the phone rings for another. And before long, everybody's left the table. Everybody's off in another room talking to somebody else. I mean, things are crazy enough in my house that sometimes my wife will call me on my cell phone from upstairs. It's like I'm in the same house. I'm getting texts from upstairs. I'm getting phone calls from across the way. It's crazy. They're distractions. They're good to have, but we've got to be in control of it and not it in control of us. Moms and dads, you need to control the technology in your house so you can get some rest and your kids can get some rest. And then thirdly, write this down: cultural changes, distractions, and busyness. Busyness. Don't wait till you die to find rest. We get so busy, so caught up in doing so much things. The pace of life is moving so fast, it's like getting into a fast-moving stream. I remember a few years ago that Carrie and I were at the Colorado River, and you look out across the river, and it was a time when there had been a lot of flooding, and the river was at a high level, and it just looked glassy smooth across. I thought, well, hey, I'm going to go out there and get a swim. I dove out into the river, and in about 3 seconds, I was a mile further down. Because although it looked smooth, it looked like it was okay, it was moving at an extremely fast pace. I had to swim to find my way out of that river before I wound up in Mexico. It's like that. Life is like that. You jump in, and it just moves you way downstream. Busyness. So don't wait till you're dead to find rest. You know, when you go to a stoplight, you're forced to stop, aren't you? Because in Albuquerque, if you don't, you get a ticket. They'll send it to you. Watch yourself right here, Eubank and Central. And so, you stop. There are things in life that force you to stop and take a rest. Now, what's the only time that you can just drive right through a stoplight? Stop sign? Funeral procession. A funeral procession is the only time you can drive through a stoplight. So what's the only time that in this life that it seems that you can get some rest? When you die. That's what I'm talking about. Don't wait till you're dead to get some rest.